On today's episode of Fixing Nissan's Questionable Engineering Choices, we have my '08 Altima back in the spotlight. I've been noticing for a while that the car was absolutely guzzling oil, and I was suspicious that something like the valve cover or the oil pan was leaking. So I removed the stupid plastic acoustic panel, and I found oil pretty much everywhere. After cleaning off the seam between the valve cover and the head, I was able to observe that oil was actually gurgling out of the gap between them. And this was in turn splattering onto the exhaust manifold and was creating a lot of really bad looking smoke. So pretty obviously the valve cover was an issue, and so I started the removal process. Upon unplugging and removing the ignition coils, I found that they too were drenched in oil, which is another reasonable indicator of a bad valve cover gasket. Next I removed some tubing, and I started pulling all the bolts around the edges of the cover. This was all going swell until I noticed this really big piece of metal was in the way. And although I tried to work around it, what turned out to be an engine mount was completely blocking a quarter of the bolts I needed to remove. I guess you can add that to the list of questionable engineering choices. Before removing the engine mount, I put a jack and some blocks of wood under the side of the engine, and it was just a matter of removing all the bolts on the engine mount, including these ridiculously long boys. With the engine mount removed, the cover came off without any issue, and to my horror, I found that the cover was made of plastic, and that areas around the ignition coils had completely cracked off, and that indeed the seal around the edge was also cracking and failing. I'm honestly a little surprised that Nissan chose to make a plastic valve cover. I get that it's probably cheaper to make and lighter than an aluminum cover, but between the oil and the heat, I'm not surprised that it failed. Thankfully, I found an aftermarket cover that is made of aluminum, and it even is this cool red color, which I think will make my car go faster, right? And for curiosity's sake, I did compare the masses between the two covers. The plastic one weighed in at a smidge over a kilogram, and the metal one was about 1.7 kilos, so the aluminum cover is almost twice as heavy as the plastic. But considering that the car is almost 1.4 metric tons, I'm feeling like an extra kilo will not really hurt that much. With the new shiny cover in hand, it was just a matter of throwing it onto the engine. You are supposed to tighten down all the bolts in this specific order in order to apply uniform pressure to the seal. With that done, I threw on the new cap, I reconnected all of the tubing, and I put that stupid engine mount back on the car so I could actually drive it again. And as with a lot of car repair, it took most of my tools, it took way longer than I expected, and was far messier than I wanted, but the result is pretty nice. I'm honestly just kind of sad that I have to put the acoustic panel back on over that fancy new valve cover.